Joining us now on the line, Fox News national security analyst KT McFarland. Good day to have you here, given all that's going on in Ukraine. Looking at a Wall Street Journal report this morning that said a number of combat vehicles flying the Russian flag have been spotted in East Ukraine. Apparently somebody walked up and asked them who they were, and they claimed that they were Ukrainian troops that had switched sides, but they're not able to confirm that report, and Lord knows it could be some kind of propaganda effort. But nonetheless, things are very, very tense right now with the Russians continuing to mass troops along the border with Ukraine.
Yeah, and it's not only massing troops across the border, but what they're doing inside the Ukrainian border, but they're not, owning up to. And I think Putin has figured out Obama's number. I mean, Obama keeps calling him, saying, let's have diplomacy, let's talk this over, you shouldn't do that. You're on the wrong side of history. But the bottom line is the Soviet spy master has Obama's number. And he has the number of the Europeans, too. He understands that by incremental itty-bitty steps that can't ever really be put on Russia's doorstep, he's going to get what he wants. He's not going to have an armed attack. I mean, he could if he needed to, but he's going to get what he wants without that armed attack. And what he's going to do in eastern Ukraine and probably Moldova, and there are now reports that maybe it's happening in Estonia, where they send in Russian sort of agent provocateurs or special forces, but they've taken their labels off their patches off their uniforms. And they're sort of stirring things up.
They're just stirring the pot, trying to foment some kind of revolution there.
Yeah, and what happens then is that the host country, Ukraine, maybe Slovenia, Moldova, whoever, is going to then have to say, well, we're going to send in the troops. Or I think what's more likely is that the Ukrainian government has already announced they'd be amenable to some sort of federation in Ukraine. And that's the opening Putin wants. Then they have an election in the eastern Ukrainian provinces, or the equivalent of our states, and then they'll vote to join Russia or at least leave Ukraine, and Russia will get what it wants. I don't think it necessarily wants to put the Russian flag in all of these places as much as it wants political domination over them.
KT, a lot of conservatives like what Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky has to say about domestic policy, taxation, about the role of government in our lives, but they're very wary of his foreign policy and his positions on national security. He has a Washington Post profile, just hit today, actually, and the headline is, "Foreign Policy is No Place for Red Lines." And he brings up the issue of a nuclear Iran as an example. He says he's not for containment in Iran, but he voted against a bill that was put before him that said that the U.S. would never contain Iran. He wants to leave his options open. Does he have a point there?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's jumping all over Rand Paul now, but I've spent actually some time talking to him, and I believe he has thought through these issues, and his approach is very nuanced, and it's hard to explain because of that. I don't think he's an isolationist as much as he's a non-interventionist, and those are very different things. The isolationist just says, oh, look, we're going to hide behind the moats of the Atlantic and Pacific, we're going to pull up the drawbridge, and the world can go its merry way. But, those days are past because we are a global economy. The interventionist part, though, is interesting. I think he's getting at the sort of neocon wars of preemption. Vietnam, Afghanistan, after al-Qaeda left, Iraq. We entered these wars with great enthusiasm, but no declaration of war. And that's Rand Paul's sticking point, is there was never a declaration of war. And there was never that sort of gravitas, that tough conversation that comes with a declaration of war. And yet these wars, once begun, dragged on. And we kept changing our mission, defining what victory looked like, and it was always something just out of our reach. So it cost and lost a lot of American blood and treasure. I think where he's going is that whole notion that even somebody like Kissinger has said, we've got to find a way out to avoid these wars that we enter with great enthusiasm but can never figure out how to get out of once they've begun.
KT McFarland, many people would characterize you as a bit of a hawk when it comes to national security. Am I right to say that you're not ruling out Rand Paul as a viable candidate?
Oh, look, I don't do politics.
I know.
I've had my brush with that. I'm not interested. But I do think that
he's not a non-starter for you, because for a lot of people, he's a non-starter.
None of these guys are non-starters. I want a winner. I just want to stop digging this hole that we're in. And whoever can win is my guy. But as far as the foreign policy of it, the Reagan, and people always come to me and say, well, what would Reagan have done? You wrote the Pentagon Reagan, you wrote a lot of stuff for Reagan on foreign policy. What's his position? Peace through strength sounds like a throwaway line, but it was a very real thing, and it was and this is where I would fault someone like Rand Paul. If you believe in peace through strength, you better vote for the meanest, toughest, strongest military on the planet. And that means you better have missile defense. You better have, I think, more intelligence. You certainly better have a cyber defense, because that's where the attacks are coming. And when Reagan said peace through strength, he meant what he used to call, the greatest prize fighter approach, that nobody ever messed with the big prize fighters because they knew they'd get whooped if they tried it. And so I think that's the defense of peace through strength. You're so strong that you don't, and you're never going to go preemptively and use any of that force to invade anybody else. That was the other part of it. But if anybody was thinking about picking a fight with you, like picking a fight with Jack Dempsey, you just didn't do it because you knew you were going to get hammered. And that's how you kept the peace. I
want to ask you a question about this thing that happened the other day with the Russian plane that was buzzing the USS Donald Cook. Mm-hmm. You talked a moment ago about what would Reagan have done. Would the rules of engagement have been different in a situation like that? I mean, it seems to me this is an incredibly provocative act.
Yeah, but I don't think the Russians would have dared do it to Reagan, because he would have sort of positioned himself in a very different position. It's like the Iranians saying, we want to nominate to the UN this guy as an ambassador.
And that's my larger question. Does this speak to the fact that we are so disrespected by the Russians that they feel like they can thumb their nose at us in such a provocative way?
Yes. I think, the Bush, the neocon foreign policy was one where America was hated, and now we've got the Obama foreign policy, which is one where America's humiliated.
All right. We'll leave it right there. KT McFarland, thank you so much.